There are some people in the Bible whose lives remind us that God does not wait until someone is older, powerful, or popular before he calls them. Sometimes God speaks to someone young, someone ordinary, someone still learning, someone serving quietly in the background. That is what makes the story of Samuel so powerful. Samuel was born during a time when many people in Israel were not truly listening to God. The Bible says the word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not common. It was a spiritually quiet time, not because God had nothing to say, but because people were not positioned to hear him. Samuel's mother, Hannah, had prayed deeply for a child. She had cried out to God in her pain, asking him to remember her. And when God answered her prayer and gave her a son, Hannah did something very difficult. She gave Samuel back to the Lord. While Samuel was still young, she brought him to the house of the Lord, where he served under Eli the priest. Samuel did not begin his life in a palace. He was not raised in a king's court. He was not surrounded by fame or power. He began by serving, quietly, faithfully, doing small things in the house of the Lord. And that is one of the first lessons from Samuel's life. God often prepares people in hidden places before he uses them in visible places. Samuel's story did not begin with a crowd. It began with service. It began with obedience. It began with learning how to be faithful in small things. Sometimes we want the big assignment before we have learned how to serve in the quiet place. We want the platform before the preparation. We want the result before the process. But Samuel reminds us that hidden seasons are not wasted seasons. The quiet place can be the place where God is shaping your heart. The place where no one is clapping may be the place where God is preparing you for something greater. Then one night, something happened that changed Samuel's life. Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Everything was quiet. Eli's eyesight had grown weak, and he was lying down in his own place. Then Samuel heard a voice calling him, "Samuel." Samuel quickly got up and ran to Eli. He said, "Here I am, for you called me." But Eli said, "I did not call. Go back and lie down." So Samuel went back and lay down. Then the voice came again, "Samuel." Again Samuel got up and went to Eli. "Here I am, for you called me." And again Eli said, "I did not call, my son. Go back and lie down." Samuel did not yet understand that it was the Lord calling him. Then it happened a third time. The Lord called Samuel again. And again Samuel got up and went to Eli. This time Eli understood that the Lord was calling the boy. So Eli told Samuel, "Go and lie down, and if he calls you, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went back and lay down in his place. Then the Lord came and called as before, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel answered, "Speak, for your servant is listening." That moment is one of the most beautiful moments in Samuel's life, because Samuel's calling did not begin with Samuel speaking. It began with Samuel listening. Before Samuel became a prophet, he first became a listener. Before he became a voice to the nation, he learned to recognize the voice of God. And that is a lesson we need today. We live in a noisy world. Everyone is talking. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone wants to be seen, heard, followed, and recognized. But Samuel's story teaches us that spiritual maturity begins with listening, listening to God, listening with humility, listening even when we do not fully understand. Samuel did not say, "Lord, make me famous." He did not say, "Lord, give me power." He did not say, "Lord, let people notice me." He said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." That one sentence shows the posture of Samuel's heart. He was available, he was humble, he was ready to obey, but the message God gave Samuel was not an easy one. God told Samuel about the judgment that would come upon Eli's house because of the sin and corruption happening through Eli's sons. Samuel was young. Eli was his mentor. Eli was the priest he served under. And now Samuel had received a difficult message from God. The next morning, Samuel was afraid to tell Eli the vision, and we can understand why. It is not always easy to speak the truth. It is not always easy to say what God has placed on your heart. It is not always easy to obey when obedience may make someone uncomfortable. But Eli called Samuel and asked him to tell everything the Lord had said. So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. That is another powerful lesson from Samuel's life. Obedience sometimes requires courage. Samuel had to move from hearing God to obeying God. And that is where many people struggle. It is one thing to hear the truth. It is another thing to walk in it. It is one thing to know what is right. It is another thing to do what is right. Samuel's obedience was not loud or dramatic, but it was courageous. He did not change the message to make it easier. He did not hide the parts that were uncomfortable. He did not pretend God had not spoken. He told the truth. And from that moment, Samuel continued to grow. The Bible says that Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and did not let any of his words fall to the ground. All Israel came to know that Samuel was established as a prophet of the Lord. But notice something important. Samuel's influence came after his obedience. His public calling came after his private listening. His leadership came after his faithfulness. This is a lesson we can carry into our own lives. Many people want influence, but not everyone wants obedience. Many people want purpose, but not everyone wants preparation. Many people want God to use them, but not everyone wants to be shaped by Him. Samuel teaches us that the person God uses is often the person who is willing to listen, serve, and obey before anyone is watching. Later in Samuel's life, God used him to guide Israel. He became a prophet, a judge, and a spiritual leader. He anointed Saul as Israel's first king. And later, when Saul disobeyed God, Samuel had to confront him. That could not have been easy. But again, we see the same pattern in Samuel's life. Samuel listened to God, then obeyed God, even when it was difficult. Later, God sent Samuel to the house of Jesse to anoint the next king. When Samuel saw Eliab, Jesse's son, he thought, surely this must be the Lord's anointed. But God told Samuel not to look at his appearance or height, because man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. This shows us something important. Even mature people must continue depending on God's guidance. Samuel was a prophet. He knew God's voice. He had walked with God for many years, but even Samuel needed correction. Even Samuel could have judged by appearance. Even Samuel needed God to remind him that his ways are higher than human ways. That should humble us. No matter how much we grow, we still need God's direction. No matter how experienced we become, we still need to listen. No matter how much we think we understand, we still need God to guide our decisions. Samuel's life teaches us that listening to God is not something we do once, it is a lifestyle. We listen when we are young. We listen when we are older. We listen in hidden seasons. We listen in leadership. We listen when the message is comforting. And we listen when the message is difficult. When we look at Samuel's life, we see someone who was not perfect, but was deeply committed to God. His story reminds us that God can call someone from a young age. God can use someone who starts in a quiet place. God can shape a life through service, obedience, and listening. And perhaps the most important question Samuel's story asks us is this: are we listening? Not just hearing noise, not just chasing opinions, not just following what everyone else is doing, but truly listening for God's direction. Because sometimes God's voice comes in the quiet. Sometimes purpose begins when we are simply faithful where we are. Sometimes the next step is not to speak louder, move faster, or prove ourselves more. Sometimes the next step is to say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." That was the posture that changed Samuel's life, and it can change ours too. Samuel teaches us to serve faithfully in hidden places, to listen before we speak, to obey even when it is hard, to depend on God's guidance instead of judging by appearance, and to trust that God can call us, shape us, and use us in His own time. So wherever you are right now, do not despise the quiet place. Do not think your hidden season is meaningless. Do not assume that because things seem silent, God is not working. Samuel was lying down in the quiet when God called his name. And sometimes, in the quiet places of our own lives, God is still calling. The question is whether our hearts are ready to answer. Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.